Welcome to episode 5 of the Monday Night Review. I'm sitting here in the 28-degree heat, feeling a little bit sorry for myself. Last week I managed to fall from my son's skateboard and break my wrist in 4 places. I had an operation on Friday, but unfortunately it's my right hand and I'm right-handed, so I'm feeling very incompetent, incredibly lazy because I can't do anything for myself, and a bit silly. And as a makeup artist primarily and a writer secondarily, not being able to use my right hand is difficult. So thank you to everyone who has supported us on Patreon so far, and to everyone who has bought me a coffee. It makes all the difference. Because Lordy knows what I'm going to do, but I can still podcast. And this week, I'm going to tell you about a story that I find kind of endlessly intriguing, even though there's not that much info on it. So settle down. This would be way better on a chilly October evening, possibly when the rain was falling. So just picture that. As soon as I finish recording, switching the fan back on. So, cuddle in, let's get going. One of the things I love most about living in London is the fact that quite often you can imagine yourself in a penny dreadful. Yeah, there are lots more chicken shops than there used to be, but in most areas of the capital, especially when you look up, you can see some architecture as atmospheric as the setting for novels and smoke-filled ghost stories. I love looking for old signs, especially still on the buildings, now used for something much more modern than its original incarnation. Old Chiswick Laundry, now flats and offices, looking very clean. It's on my dog walk route to the river. The old school entrances at the school in my house, with one for boys and one for girls, beautifully stone chiselled signs above the gates. And my favourite, the Hammersmith telephone exchange with fantastic vintage font. I always imagine miles of wire and efficient, beautifully dressed operators in the now mostly empty building. A lot of Victorian ghost and horror stories can seem ridiculous to our modern minds, especially those who grew up with the internet. So you're going to have to imagine no internet, not much electricity, and just your imagination has not been expanded by the wonders of CGI. So this story never fails to intrigue me, and I'm going to tell you today the story of Spring-Heeled Jack. So this takes place between about 1836 and 1904. London at the time was the largest city in the world, with the largest port in the world, and the centre for world trade and finance. The geographical site of London was expanding to fit the growing population of the city, and while there was a lot of money to match the financial and political growth, there was also immense poverty, with thousands living in unsanitary slums. This is the abject poverty and misery which is captured in some of Dickens' more famous novels. Though by the 1880s, London would be considered a well-lit city, a lot of these stories of Spring-Heeled Jack take place in areas of suburban London with few gas streetlights. The Metropolitan Police had just been set up, and though there were 1,000 bobbies, corruption was rife, and outside the City of London, local government was chaotic at best. For those of you non-London dwellers, we confusingly have London City and the City of London. The City of London is the central area of London where the law courts are, all the banks are, where the business takes place, and that's called the City of London. So if you hear that referred to, that's what I mean. In September 1837, in Barnes, which is now southwest London, but at the time would have been a village quite far on the outskirts of the city, there were reports of a phantom attacking women. No one could be found who had actually witnessed the assailant, but in October, Mary Stevens was making her way back from Battersea to Lavender Hill, and whilst walking through Clapham Common, a strange figure leapt out at her, immobilized her with his tight grip of his arms, and started kissing her. He ripped at her clothes and then her skin with ice-like claws. Mary screamed and her assailant fled. The next day, not far from the scene, someone leapt in front of a carriage, causing it to topple over and gravely injure the driver. The attacker was seen fleeing over a 9-foot wall, cackling with crazy laughter. The news spread, and he was given the name Spring Heel Jack by the media for this amazing feat of Victorian parkour. These sightings continue without much governmental interest until early 1838, when the Lord Mayor of London reveals he's received an anonymous letter from an aggrieved resident of Peckham asking what the Lord Mayor intends to do about these attacks, which, the writer believes, are being committed by someone from the highest ranks of society. In the letter, it is said that Spring Heel Jack has relieved 7 women of their senses, leaving them a burden upon their families. Indeed, according to the servants across Hammersmith, Ealing and Kensington, the ghost of the devil is seen to walk. By now, he's also been seen in Brixton, Vauxhall, Camberwell, Stockwell, Lewisham, Blackheath, and on the 14th of April 1838, the Brighton Gazette runs a report about a gardener terrified in his own garden by Spring Heel Jack. The only thing connecting all of these reports is the strange and terrifying appearance, sometimes like that of a bear or a wolf, sometimes breathing fire, almost always with metal claws instead of hands, and wearing tight gentleman's clothing. There are 2 particular attacks that appeared in the media that are of interest to those looking for actual Spring Heel Jack attacks. The first attack with a witness was on the 20th of February 1838 in Bearbinder Cottage, Oldford. Jane Alsop hears someone ringing at the bell at 8:45 p.m. A man says, "For God's sake, bring me a light. I've caught Spring Heel Jack here in the lane." She runs back to the house and brings him a light, and he holds it up, revealing a horrifying face, vomiting blue flame, red eyes. He rips at her clothes and skin with metal claws. His clothing is tight and appears to be white oilskins. She escapes and flees for the house. He catches her by the doorway, clawing at her neck. Luckily, one of her sisters comes to save her, and Spring Heel Jack flees. Just 9 days later, on the 28th of February 1838, 18-year-old Lucy Scales and her sister are walking through a respectable area of Limehouse on their way back from the brothers' butcher shop. As they walk through a passageway, the man in front of them turns, and from his mouth spews blue flame right into Lucy's face, causing her to lose her sight temporarily and fall to the floor. She shrieks, as does her sister. The assailant flees, and her brother comes running. They were that close to his house. When asked, her sister describes the assailant as being tall and of gentlemanly appearance. She also notes he was carrying a lamp similar to those carried by the police. On the 2nd of March, 1838, the trial of Thomas Milbank begins. On the evening of the attack on Jane Alsop, Thomas Milbank had boasted in a pub that he was Spring Heel Jack, and he had just carried out an attack. He was wearing his oilskins when he was picked up, and had dropped his greatcoat and candle, both of which were found at the scene. He escaped conviction because he could not breathe fire, which Jane insisted her assailant could do. Spring Heel Jack now becomes a famous figure in London. Featuring in penny dreadfuls, poetry and plays at the time, it seems that not only were many using Spring Heel Jack as an excuse or cover to attack women, the media and police force were also using the spree as an excuse not to investigate attacks on women. Jack became a London bogeyman. The last sightings of Spring Heel Jack take place in Aldershot, Lincolnshire and Liverpool. In Aldershot, several soldiers see a strange figure approach a sentry, slap him in the face, and then, when shot at, laughing crazily and disappearing into the darkness with great bounds. In 1877 in Lincoln, a mob corners a strange figure in a sheepskin, Once again, the man appears oblivious to shots fired and makes his escape with great leaps. There's various sightings of him on rooftops, and these continue from 1888 to 1904, mostly in Liverpool. Amongst the serving classes, the legend was that Jack was a real supernatural monster. In the upper classes, he was rumoured to be the result of a gentleman's wager. A group of men having made a bet with each other, with the Marquis of Waterford as the chief suspect. Often in the news for drunken behaviour, vandalism and brawling, his contempt for women earned him the nickname the Mad Marquis. He was in London at the time of the attacks and had been known to jump out and surprise travellers for his own amusement. He died in 1859, so he can't be held responsible for any of the attacks after that, but he seems a pretty good candidate for the traditional spring-heeled Jack attacks. Some have categorised spring-heeled Jack as a phantom attacker, an extraterrestrial being with non-human features and superhuman abilities appearing in the darkness, springing from roof to roof. In more recent times, spring-heeled Jack has even become a superhero, saving some plucky orphans from peril in a Philip Pullman comic and appearing almost as a Tigger-style Robin Hood in others. I believe it's probably a stupid bet by some youth, basically, who were agile and pissed. And it sounds like the Mad Marquis could very much have carried out a few of the attacks. I think it sounds to me like Thomas Milbank carried out the attack on Jane Alsop. And the fire breathing is difficult. It obviously could be done at the time, but it would have to be specialised. We are coming at this from imaginations that have seen the internet and incredible CGI movies. I mean, I still watch Jurassic Park and get amazed by the dinosaurs. If you took all of that away, then the eye is much easier to deceive. So I think it probably was, I'm using air quotes, except I'm not because I've got a broken wrist, but imagine them a prank by some men that got out of hand. The group that the Marquis of Waterford ran with were not that appealing. He does get married and go off and live happily and quietly in Ireland until he falls off a horse and dies in 1859. So it could be that this was his final hurrah. But I love the story of Spring-heeled Jack. It feels like a real Victorian horror. And when I'm walking around London late at night, I just can picture this terrifying man. For a lot of people, they believed that he literally had either springs in the heels of his shoes, or he was this supernatural being with springs in his heels. I think it was just a media term coined, and it's a very agile. If you think about what kids can do with parkour now, I think a bored person is a creative person. So I'm pretty sure you'd have had some fairly agile Victorians, and maybe being able to get yourself over a 9-foot fence speedily was seen to be a great feat. I mean, I couldn't do it. And this has got out of hand, but in a rather lovely Victorian way. It's a fantastic name. So I hope you enjoyed the story of Spring-heeled Jack. I'd like to thank my mum and my husband and Holly Clark and Jessica Mosquita for their help with this week's episode. There's been typing, there's been Googling, there's been telling me to talk slower. And I couldn't have done it without you. And for everyone else, if you want to check out our Patreon, look for the link in the show notes. And until next time, be kind, stay safe, and always check the back of your car before you drive.